Welcome to Fake Love and Flying Monkeys, the podcast where fake love is exposed. I'm Nova Gibson and I am your host. I'm the principal counsellor at Brighter Outlook Narcissistic Abuse Counselling.com.au. This space is dedicated to helping you reclaim your worth and understand the impact of toxic relationships with suspected narcissists. You deserve clarity, healing, and freedom from the pain of fake love and flying monkeys. So please leave a review and grab a copy of my book, Fake Love, Understanding and Healing from Narcissistic Abuse. Let's uncover the truth and take back your power. Hi everyone, and welcome to another episode of Fake Love and Flying Monkeys. Today I feel blessed, very, very lucky that another victim of abuse, has bravely wanted to share her story with me and you. Now, my very special guest today, her name is Tracy Rector. Tracy is an award-winning producer. She is a speaker, an author, and a survivor. She uses her voice to raise awareness of gender-based violence. As an international speaker, she has shared her passion, inspiring audience in the US, including Guam, Asia, Pacific, and the UK. USA Today recognized her film, No Ordinary Love, as one of the biggest summer movies of 2021. She served as board chair of the second largest domestic violence agency in Texas, and she is currently part of a research project with national industry leaders to develop a game-changing tool to address domestic violence. Welcome, Tracy. Thank you so much for joining us here today on this episode.
Thank you so much for inviting me. I'm happy to be here.
My absolute pleasure. I'm so grateful that you're giving your time to talk to us about your story and everything else that you're doing in your life to help other victims and survivors. So, Tracy, I'm going to hand it over to you. Tell us a little bit more, or a lot more, about yourself and your experiences.
Sure, I'm happy to do that. I think it's important when survivors are ready to use their voice, and I think telling our story helps other victims and survivors deal with their own situation wherever they are on their own journey. So I'm happy to do that today when I share my story. I often get asked the question, when did you know it was an abusive relationship? And I think for me personally, I have to look back and know that. I didn't know it at the moment. So the very first moment I knew that my marriage was going to be difficult and hard was actually at my wedding reception. As strange and odd as that sounds. But just the response from him of beginning that role of control, and that he was going to be in charge. So refusing to dance with me at our wedding, refusing to cut the cake with me at the wedding, a lot based on religious beliefs, but that was the beginning of it. And the honeymoon continued with that, where I spent quite a bit of time alone. So that was the beginning of probably one of the worst years of my life, the first year of my marriage. Not seeing it as anything like any relationship I'd seen before, certainly not the one that I grew up with my parents. Yes. So it began with that. And I think most survivors will look back on and see that you don't recognize it at first because it's not just a full-on assault. It's this slow, gradual, pretty much daily drip of this control and abuse that begins to erode away at who you are, at your identity, your self-worth, and your goals and your joys and the things that you love to do. They take that away gradually. And I was listening to your book, and it was interesting how you talk about how this kind of creeps up into it. And it's so slow and subtle, and it's all done under this guise of care and love. I only care about you. That's why I want to know where you're going and those things. So as a young married woman, I did not recognize that at all. And looking back on it, I wish I had been able to see the red flags that were there before we even got married. For example, the story he told me about how he was adopted. And so to reveal his need for me to empathize and sympathize with him
Right.
He told me he was adopted. And it wasn't until months later that I realized that he'd been with his biological mother all along. It was that she remarried after his father died, and his stepfather adopted him. So I
Oh
thought
my
that was very
goodness.
strange, but that was my first, looking back, that was my first indication of narcissism,
Yeah.
which
So
I did not even
he's
know.
using being adopted as a sympathy card to it sounds like, to get you to feel sorry or maybe as an excuse to abuse you. But it turns out that he was adopted by the stepmother, the stepfather. So that
Yeah,
puts you in an awkward position where you would start to not trust yourself because, well,
right.
he wasn't lying. And that's part of
And
the
that's what his response
relation,
was
isn't
to
it?
me. Yeah, when I confronted him about it, he was like, well, it's the truth,
Yeah.
a
He knew
version of the
exactly
truth,
what
but
he was doing. He
technically,
knew he was manipulating you.
and then I was being mean to him because I wasn't accepting him in that role that he wanted me to
Yes.
see him in. And there were other red flags that if once I learned about later on, learned more about abuse and learned about narcissism, he had few to no friends. And so that's a big indicator for narcissism. They have people around them, but they're not really friends, as you
Yes.
have mentioned before. And I think I kind of laughingly mentioned this, but the other indicator that should have been a huge red flag for me was that he didn't like dogs. I thought back, I
Who
go, that
doesn't
should have
like
been the first
dogs?
sign for me. Well, it's if you look into it for narcissists, they typically don't like pets
Yeah.
because that attention gets away from them and to the pet.
Yeah.
And they don't usually like other people's children and on and on. But I think I laugh about that. That was the biggest red flag. I should have noticed that. But
Yeah.
after that first year of marriage, I got pregnant very early within the first few months of marriage. And it wasn't until just a couple of years ago that I realized that I was part of his control with reproductive health. And that's how I got pregnant because he wanted to be in charge of the birth control and I wasn't comfortable with it, but that's all he would do. And so without going into too many nitty-gritty details, that's how I got pregnant early on in the marriage. And so that changed the dynamic of the relationship pretty quickly. It
Of
was
course.
almost the same as like a shotgun wedding to where you have all that stress and pressure early on in the marriage
Yeah.
without giving that marriage a chance to become healthy and grow. And honestly, I do feel like if I hadn't gotten pregnant in the first year or two of the marriage, it probably most likely would not have lasted. But
Yeah.
once I was pregnant and the child came, I was all in. I'd made a vow and I took it
Yeah.
seriously. And so
Yes.
I was determined to find a way to make it work. And again, I did not think of it as abusive. So we got married in 1982. And as you know, most of the domestic violence shelter agencies just began appearing around the world in the 70s, mid 70s to late 70s. And so
Yes.
domestic violence really wasn't a topic that people talked about much. You might see it in a movie that had really extreme physical violence,
Mm.
but I would never have identified with that as
Yeah,
that was
there
part of
certainly
my
wouldn't have been, or there wasn't any real understanding of coercive control, which goes hand in hand with narcissistic
right,
abuse.
right. They may have talked to, yeah, they
You've
may
got
have
to
talked
have
about the
black
emotional
eyes,
abuse.
broken bones. Then you're a
Right.
victim of domestic violence. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's what. And so even throughout the marriage, I never had the physical abuse where I had bruises or I had to go to the emergency room,
Yeah.
but the bruises were on the inside, that
Mm.
continuous drip of that emotional abuse. And being married so young, right out of college, I think was also a mistake. And looking back on it, I have three children, a son and two daughters, and I raised my kids with the idea that you don't get married that young. You need to wait to your late 20s, early 30s at the earliest because you don't even know who you are. And choosing a life partner at that age is not a good idea and was part of my mistake, being young and naive. And he was older. He was 8 years older
Mhm.
and more educated in his regard, more worldly, wiser. So there was that differential of power
The
in the
power
relationship.
imbalance. Yeah.
Yeah, that just kept that kind of laid that foundation for the abuse to
Yeah.
happen and continue. So that's pretty much how we started out in the marriage. And we had our son, a couple of years later, a daughter. I just kind of leaned into it and really got into being a mom and being a parent and trying to make this work and create a happy home for them. And it gradually, I didn't really, when you're in it, you don't see it, but you look back on it and you can see it so clearly, that gradual beat down of who you are. And I've done a lot of reflecting lately because I've another project I want to work on. But what I do is think about what was his goal? I mean, what was the thing that he did that he wanted to do to take away that agency from me? And a lot of it is they take away your joy. Yeah. They want to know what they act like they're very interested in what you're interested in, what you like. But when they know that, then they use that to inflict that control and that power over you, and that harm that he has that power differential level over you.
And they have this great knack of making you do the dirty work, so to speak, by you saying no, or maybe you giving things up, because the punishment is just not worth having those passions in your life, such as, the silent treatment, etc.
Right. Well, yeah, the silent treatment for sure. Yeah. And they'll make you feel guilty for wanting to do something that might take your attention away from them. Or if you have something that they sense that you really like and it brings you joy, they'll even say out loud, well, why does that bring you more joy than me? What about me? It's always that sort of thing. And one of the examples I give is when I was in high school, I played the drums. I was a percussionist and I loved it very, very much. And Karen Carpenter, in the 70s and early 80s, was my hero. And I loved her music. I grew up with that, listening to it at home. And after she passed away, one of her songs would come up on the radio, and he would mention, oh, there's dead Karen, and make some kind of crazy comments about that, demeaning her and making her sound like she was not a great person. And that's just an example of how they take your joy and they can diminish it so much that you begin to not even want to either have it, or you don't want to talk about it or mention it around them anymore, because they'll ridicule that so much.
You learn not to talk about any successes or achievements or anything like that makes you happy, because you know that they will put a negative spin on it and it will no longer become something enjoyable in your life. But like what happened to you, Tracy, it was too late. You had that conditioned reaction where it was taken away from you. It was no longer a passion for you.
Yeah. One of the nuances in our marriage that made it different than some other abusive relationships was the fact that he was a minister. And so he used faith and our spirituality to inflict some of his abuse. And that's what a lot of people don't understand, that the abuser will find low-hanging fruit to use in the abusive relationship. Whatever it is, whether it's your joy or something that you share in common, they will use that. And that's where the financial abuse can come in as well. It's whatever is easier for them to use in that relationship to inflict that power and control. And so the spiritual abuse was often, when I speak on stages and I have people do a Q&A afterwards, I often ask them, what do you mean by that? What is spiritual abuse? How is that used? I've even had domestic violence experts ask me that question, which I find very interesting. So I give examples of it. Anytime he could use our faith to control me, try to make me do something or not do something, he would take advantage of that. So one thing that he would tell me is that he thought women should have long hair because he preferred women to have long hair.
Yeah, and that's okay. Everyone's got their preferences, but it's not okay when you make someone feel guilty because they don't like what you like.
Right. Yeah. So he would demand that my hair would be long. And I think I had young kids, I didn't have time to deal with that. So every time I would get my hair cut, I would come home. I wouldn't tell him I was doing it because I would, hear the abuse before. So I would just come home and my hair would be cut. And he literally would not speak to me. The silencing would begin. And it would last sometimes a day, sometimes 2 days or 3 days, depending. And if you've never experienced silencing, it is so cruel. You're in the same home, you're in the same family, you usually are communicating one way or the other, but when you're silenced, he will walk past you as if you are not even there. Like
Yeah.
not even, no eye
It,
contact.
it's a form of torture,
It
isn't
is.
it?
It's absolutely
Yeah.
horrible. And he
Yeah.
would do this for days sometimes. And finally, I just couldn't take it anymore. So I would go and either apologize or beg him to stop. And when he felt like I was punished enough, he would bring his Bible in hand and read to me from Ephesians 5, wives should be subject to their husbands. And he would also read from Colossians about women are supposed to have long flowing hair. And he thought that if I continued to cut my hair, I was not going to be able to live with him in eternity because I'd be going to hell. And I would push back. I would just bring out the illogical nature of that argument and say things like, your mother has short hair. Is she
Yeah.
going to hell too? My mother,
Yeah.
and he would say that her salvation is not in my hands, yours is. So
Yeah. So
that was,
they're not interested in logic, are they,
no,
Tracy? That's just gaslighting, isn't it? Straight up gaslighting because he's got a different set of rules for you, but it's just
yeah.
about getting you to react and that power and control.
Right. And if he had any other thing that he wanted me to do and I would push back, because I'm a very strong, opinionated woman and I didn't necessarily acquiesce to those kinds of things. But
Mhm.
if we ever had a disagreement about something, or even if it was just something banal, it didn't even have to be a really important thing, he would do that Ephesians 5 that I needed to be subject to his will and in his way
My
often.
goodness.
And being a woman of faith, that was really difficult for me to sit with me because it always felt like God was over there on his side. And here I am arguing against him and God. And I'm always losing that battle.
My
You
goodness, the
can't ever,
cognitive dissonance you must have experienced trying to reconcile the words of someone who is such a man of God, such an important, influential person in
yeah.
that religious arena, I guess, with what he's doing and saying it because they don't match up.
Right. And he was a person of authority,
Yeah.
especially in that area. And he
Yeah.
would always remind me that he's more educated, that he knows more about this than I do, and he knows
Yes.
how to interpret scripture, and that's what he does for a living and that sort of thing. And who am I to argue with him when he has the word of God in his side? So that whole thing, it creates this internal conflict with yourself. So that you're
Yes.
you're kind of in conflict with not only with him, but with your faith as well, because it doesn't feel very good to feel like you're being rejected by your faith. So
Yeah.
it was a big part of our family dynamic and our marriage dynamic. And throughout when my kids were younger, I tried really hard to create this happy home and shield them from as much of that toxic part of his relationship as I could, and have
Mhm.
happy fun times. And we did pretty well. We traveled together and we did fun things together. But it all changed when they started becoming preteens, teenagers, when
Yes.
their minds are starting to develop and they're thinking, wait a minute, what? That doesn't seem right. And so when things like one of the things that was really important to me is my kids, I wanted them to love each other, to like each other, to be kind to each other, to
Mhm.
have a sibling relationship. And one of the ways I expressed that to them is when they did something against their brother or sister that they needed to apologize. And so, of course, that was not done right at first. You have to teach them how to do that. So you can't just say sorry under your breath. It
Yeah.
has to be heartfelt. And so they'd
Yes.
have to go in their room and think about it until they could come up with the way that they wanted to express that from
Yeah.
their heart. And then they got pretty good about it. They were doing that and they knew that the other was not acceptable. They couldn't apologize like they were a toddler. So when my son is older than my daughter's a couple years younger. My middle daughter, who is the scapegoat child, that I've really honed in on that when I listened to some of your podcasts. I thought, oh my gosh, I have one of each. It's terrifying. So my scapegoat daughter would push back and call him out on things. And
Mm.
one time he was really, I thought, verbally inappropriate with her. And I pulled him aside and said, you need to apologize to her. You can't speak to her like that. Like that's just not okay. You're
Mm.
modeling inappropriate behavior and they're picking it up. They're learning from you. So he goes and opens her door to her room and says sorry and closes the door. That's how he apologized to her. And she comes flying out of her room, hands on hips, sass all frass, all can be, and says, "Why does dad get to apologize like he's a toddler, but we aren't able to?"
Wow. So,
Oh,
and
yeah. So,
that's why she was chosen as the scapegoat.
yeah, absolutely. Yes.
And she wasn't going to settle for the status quo. They
No,
picked the roles for each child very carefully.
they do. And that's why, I mean, it just created a lot of friction in the marriage at that point. And I began to sense as it going on and on, I sensed that I was losing her. I could see it in her eyes and in her behavior change, even with me and my relationship with her, because she could sense that it was almost like you could see it in her face, the questions of why are we still here? Like, what is going on? And why are you letting this happen? And why can't you control this? And it really started making me think about that I couldn't protect them anymore. Now they were old enough that they could see what I had hoped that they couldn't see when they were younger. And so it changed the dynamic a bit. And the year that my daughter turned 14 was the same year that my father passed away at 65, which now that I'm 64 seems extremely young. And
Yeah.
it was devastating for me. I was in deep grief because it was such a shock for our family. And I really didn't know, being in the marriage that I was in, where I felt completely unsupported and unloved, quite honestly, that was a very pivotal point for me because I didn't really know how to go on to function. And I didn't very well for a few months. And 2 months after my father passed, he came to me and said that he's a professional and this is what he does for a living. He counsels people, and that it appears to him that I am stuck in the grieving process and I needed to just move on through the steps of grieving. And I said, "What
So
are you
once again,
talking
he's
about?"
using his profession as a way of having you deny the feelings that you are so entitled to. He's using that religion to make you feel guilty about grieving your father.
It was a weapon. He used it as a
Yeah, he
weapon,
weaponized your
basically.
grief.
Right. So I asked him to explain give me more information about that, and he said, "Well, the meals have been pretty subpar around here, and the laundry hasn't been done in several weeks." So that was his response, and that I needed to just shape up a little bit, and that didn't really help me get out of my grief. It was
No.
about a year. It took me a year to do that, and right after that year of grieving, my son went off to college. And so he was the main narcissistic supply in the home. And so that really changed the dynamics and made things get a lot more difficult with the children, with all that. So I came to a point where I realized that I couldn't go on the way it was. I was 40 years old, and that was like a midpoint at that point, like a midpoint in my life. And I thought, I can't do this for 40 more years. I can't do it this way. And I really wasn't, I didn't have leaving on my radar yet, but I did have something needs to change. Things have got to get different than they are. So I approached him with some changes that I wanted to have in the marriage and in the relationship. And as you can imagine, being married to a narcissist and telling them you want them to change,
Yeah,
it did
he
not go
wouldn't have
well.
liked that because you were taking his control away. You're putting boundaries in, and that's the last thing a narcissist will ever let you have because they can't manipulate you anymore. Yeah.
Right, exactly. And for him, it was being a minister. We lived in this glass house. So it was like everybody would look in it and judge us as a family. And so for him, the outside appearance was so important to him of what people perceived our family to be like. And our family at home, that internal family structure, was very different in the home than it was on the outside. And he really worked hard to keep that barrier up there so that no one would see what it was like on the inside. So
Images.
he would preach about how much he loved his wife, and he would refer to me as the fox of the Western world. And so I would become envy of all these women who thought that he was the most amazing man and such a loving husband and doting father. And
Yes.
to have that persona on the outside and people commenting about that, but
Yeah.
knowing the reality that we lived in, it was very
But,
difficult. It was a lot of
well, that's
conflict.
what makes it so hard. Also, Tracy, for victims, and for you, I would imagine at the time, to get any kind of support or to be able to find someone who will have empathy for you because they're seeing this amazing person that's who
Mhm.
they're seeing because it's all going on behind closed doors.
Yeah, he was the pastor of a church of 10,000 people. So he was very
Oh,
powerful, very
yeah.
beloved, and very familiar in the community. We would go places and people would know who he was. So there was always that around with that. But there was, I also get asked the question, when was the moment that I knew that I just couldn't do this anymore? And there was like a pivotal moment leading up to all of it. And having, I think after my father died and after the grief process of having a greater awareness of how difficult my marriage was, how hard it was, and that I was starting to, the fact that it really wasn't me. I really wasn't the one that was the problem here.
Right.
Yeah. So
Do
when
you
I came
think
in and
it was
presented,
that what was the pivotal moment? Do you think your father dying and you getting absolutely no empathy whatsoever,
I think
let
that was
alone
the
having
beginning. Yeah, that was really the beginning of me looking at my situation differently. Like,
yeah.
this is really harmful. This is hurtful. This is so off the charts normal from normal of what marriage is supposed to be like. Not just from what my experience was of seeing other people, but just from a spiritual, a faith standpoint, this is not what God, in my mind, this is not the way God intended marriage to be, to where
Mm.
one person was constantly being put down and ridiculed and abused verbally and emotionally and that sort of thing. So the emotional abuse, and I've talked about this, where he would try to control my emotions. And it's hard to describe that to people. They don't understand. What do you mean? How can he possibly try to control your emotions? So we tell this story. So to this day, my daughters and I are very triggered when someone rings a bell of any kind, like sleigh bells or something like that, because he had this string of sleigh bells and he hung it in the pantry.
Mm-hmm.
He called these were the happy bells, and you were supposed to ring the bells when you were happy, and you were supposed to be happy several times during a day.
So you had to ring these bells. Was there a punishment if you didn't ring the bells?
Oh yeah. Oh, I never, and to be honest, I never rang the bells. I was not, because he did it. He introduced it a little too far into the marriage part for me to go, sure, I'll do that. No, no, I was not. The kids kind of got into it. At first, they thought it was fun,
Yeah.
and then when Dad would, because he would ring it 4 or 5 times a day, and when he didn't hear them ring the bell, there would be that admonishment for not doing that. So it got to be like, well, I'm not doing, you can't make me do that. You can't make me be happy.
Oh
And I
my
finally,
Oh my
and he would
goodness.
ask
It's
me,
like, I don't know if you've heard of, or many people out there listening today have heard of, but it's like that Pavlov's dogs
yeah,
experiment, isn't it? That's what
yeah,
it sounds like. When
it
we ring the
does.
bell,
Yeah,
you need to be happy. And is there no happiness in this house because he's never hearing the bell ring? Oh my goodness, the
exactly.
crazy making.
The crazy making. And so when he would confront me and ask me why, and I said, what if I'm not happy? Do you still want me to ring the bells anyway? Yes. Well, why if I ring the bells and I'm not happy, what good does that do? He goes, well, it makes me happy to know that you're happy.
But you're not
So
happy.
but it really wasn't ever about me being happy. It was
Oh,
about doing something that makes him happy. So for
yeah.
him to hear the bells equated to him with, he has a happy family. Look what he's created. So it was a reinforcement for him. And it's that narcissistic supply, but it was a very strange way of needing that. But that to try to control someone's emotions like that, that's some
Yeah.
severe
I
narcissistic
must
control.
admit, Tracy, I thought that I had heard it all, but I've never heard that trying to make you feel guilty for not being, which is of course what he would assume because he's not hearing the bells ring. Wow. How do you wrap
Yeah.
your head around that?
Yeah, exactly. Well, it probably went on for a couple of years to where when I'm healing from my father's death and really emotionally pulling away from the marriage, trying to figure out how can I possibly navigate this going forward with these kids home and trying to create this family. And so he could sense that I was pulling away. And that's where I think he was wanting to know that I was still happy and to be in this marriage and this family. So I think that was part of it, but to need to control that. But I probably a year and a half, 2 years, still not, I'm not coming around, I'm not like the enthusiasm and energetic and happy person that I used to be. And he still is, always berating me about that and on and on. And so what I call my 2x4 across my head moment for Valentine, not an actual 2x4, but a metaphor.
He's got this lump and I'm like, oh my goodness.
Right. Yeah. For Valentine's Day, which we didn't really make a big deal of anyway, but for Valentine's Day, he gave me a book. And it was by one of his favorite authors, Dr. Laura Schlesinger. He loved her tough parenting style. He would use that with the scapegoat daughter often, the tough love, even when it wasn't necessary. Well, she wrote a book and he gave it to me for Valentine's Day. And he had highlighted parts of the book that he especially wanted me to see. And then he gives it to me as a gift. So the name of the book, believe it or not, is The Proper Care and Feeding of Husbands. That was my Valentine's Day.
And why didn't he just give you a vacuum or a mop or a cobweb duster or something?
I know. Well, I think it was such an emotional kick in the gut that I didn't even know what to do with that. So I just pushed it aside and he would bring it out and open it up and read some of the highlighted parts to me. And I would push it aside and I'd throw it away and he'd pick it out of the trash and put it on the counter and always be bringing it up. But I can laugh about it now because a couple of years later, after I'd left the marriage, I was listening to a radio show and it was Valentine's Day and they were having a contest over who got the worst Valentine present. And so I called into the show and I told them.
You won.
And the guy freaks out. He goes, "Oh my God, we have to completely stop this contest altogether for all time because no one will ever be able to top that." Gift, which made me chuckle. I thought it was kind of funny at that point, but because it reinforced to me that, yeah, that was as crazy of a gift as I thought it was at the time.
Yeah.
But it was just kind of a funny way to deal with it.
The thing is, Tracy, in a normal, healthy relationship, that might be a funny thing to do. If you've got a normal range of emotions, you might go, oh, here's a book about how to treat me better. It might be kind of an in joke and you would know that it was funny, but of course you would get, your normal romantic gift on top of it. But you knew that he meant that was his gift, and you should be grateful for that. You should be grateful for a book that tells you not only how to treat him better, it implies that you're treating him badly at the moment.
Exactly. And he would tell me, he said, I've recommended this book to numerous couples that I've been counseling. That does not make this any better. Not at all. And it was actually, when I called it the 2x4 moment, it was the strongest message to me that I was never, ever going to be good enough, never going to be a good enough wife or mother or Christian or friend of any kind. And so that was devastating to me. It really plunged me into this dark despair because what do I do now? I'm like, it's hopeless. There's never going to be a happy marriage. How can you have a happy marriage when that's what he thinks about you and about your relationship? So it got pretty bad. And it wasn't very long until after that I actually told someone for the first time about what I was dealing with. And it was my mother. And she was quite surprised. She said, in fact, that was one of the red flags I missed early on, was my family and my friends really did not care for him at all. Wow. And I just felt like they didn't understand him. And he would early on in the relationship say that it was very, very important to him that we not discuss our differences or our quarrels with anyone else. No one was ever to know if we ever, which, laughingly now I see what a huge red flag that was.
This is our relationship. This should be kept private. We don't talk about those things, which conditions you to keep the abuse behind closed doors because
absolutely
everyone argues.
Yes, right, right. And always felt like, and he would say, it's not good for the children to see us argue. And there was a huge rule in our house, according to him, that there was never any yelling between the two of us. We were never supposed to yell at each other ever. And so the argument was, it was like a passive aggressive, or there was just silence, and the kids sensed it. They knew that there was something going on. And I would tell him, I said, I think it's healthy for children to see their parents discuss something that might be difficult or not a happy situation, so they see that conflict is a part of a relationship, but you have a healthy way of dealing with it, communicating. And he absolutely would just refuse to. So when I did reveal it to my mother, she was very surprised. And after that, she recommended I go see a therapist, which that's one of my biggest regrets, is not having that a part of my life all along as a young adult, of having a counselor, a therapist that I could go to on either a regular basis at some points, or a couple of times a year as a checkup kind of situation. So I went to a therapist for the first time, and he listened a lot for the first week. And then I came to his office, and he got the DSM-5 book out, which I was not familiar with what that was. And he read from there this list of characteristics. And I just, by the fourth one, I'm just like, tears are streaming down my face, because I felt this creepy feeling of someone had been living in my home. Like, how could this be that someone else is living the life that I'm living? Because you feel so isolated and so alone when you're in that situation, because they work very hard to keep you that way. So he wouldn't tell me what it was. He goes, well, we'll talk about it next week. And so on the way home, I had to call him. I said, you have to tell me what that is. I can't wait a week to know. And that's when he told me narcissist. I'd heard about narcissism just from the Greek mythology, Narcissus and the reflection and that sort of thing, but I didn't have a degree in psychology, so I wasn't really that familiar with it. But
most people
in
society still think that, Tracy, and that reflects the lack of support. Most people think that a narcissist is someone who you can see coming. They look in the mirror all the time. They're loud and and brag a lot. Most of the time much of the time they're exactly the opposite. They're covert, and it's just not something that you think about. Is this person a narcissist? Until you have that light bulb moment when someone presents you with that word, or you start researching their behavior.
Right. And I think sometimes it's overused a little bit now. Yes. And the term is used to describe a selfish, self-centered person, which, yes, there are those, but that's not what a narcissist is. So much more complex than that. Yes. So much more. So I presented my therapist with the idea that I wanted to tell him what he was.
You wanted to go home and say, hey, I've got to
tell him. And I wanted to fix it. And my therapist cautioned that, okay, if this is what you want to do, I will guide you through this. He says, but I need to caution you that it's probably going to get a lot worse. And I said, well, I can't just say I'm leaving without trying. And so I went home and told him. And to my surprise, he listened to what I said. He went online on the internet and searched what it was. And he came back, he goes, I can see why you think I might be that. I'll work on it. I'll fix it. Which, I mean, at that point, I'd already researched enough to know that was laughable. But I gave him a chance, and I encouraged him to go to counseling himself and for us to go together. And he said, oh, no. We are not going to counseling together. That's what I do. I'm a professional. That's what I do for a living. I'm a family counselor, because he's a minister. So he counseled families. So he said, I've been doing this for 30 years. I don't need to go to marriage counseling.
I don't need to go and see someone else. And really, he's scared of having someone, a professional, see through him.
Clearly. Well, my therapist knew a psychiatrist that specialized in narcissism, and he called to ask him if he would see my ex. And it took a little cajoling, but he finally agreed to see him because he was too young. He said he typically doesn't see them till they're much older and they can actually deal with their situation. So my ex actually went to go see him a couple of times. And then he comes home one day and just so jubilant and excited. And I have something really wonderful and amazing to share with you. And I'm just, at this point, I'm just like done. I can hardly, like, what? And he says, I'm cured. I'm no longer a narcissist. The therapist said, I've cured myself. And I'm furious. I'm absolutely furious. And I said, I need to go with you. to your next therapy. So
Yeah.
we
He's
go
either
separately.
manipulated the counselor, the psychiatrist, which is typical, or
Yeah.
he's just straight up lying to you.
Well, he heard what he wanted to hear. So we
Yeah.
get to the therapist office and I'm like this, not really very happy to be there. And the psychiatrist starts with, Tracy looks like he has something to say. And I told him what he had said, and his eyes bugged out of his head. He goes, I absolutely did not say that. So,
And there it is. He was
and
just
went
straight up
and went
lying
on
to
and on.
you.
And I said, I think my work is done here. I'll leave the two of you. So he never went back after that because he
Yeah.
was called out for it. But it wasn't very long until after that I just said, I can't do this anymore. I need a divorce. We have to divorce.
Yeah.
And it took a while, a couple of weeks to get him to move out. And then I was really not prepared for what was to come. I thought naively again that we could do this amicably and not make a big fuss and just live our separate lives and raise our children.
And you could co-parent and
Yes,
do what's
yes,
best for the children.
right.
Yeah.
Which
So
is
tell us
absolutely not what happened. So,
what he put you through with the
well, the
post-separation.
gaslighting, as you can imagine, the gaslighting was just like full throttle.
Yeah.
He had to think of every possible excuse for us separating other than him. It couldn't possibly be him. So it was first a discussion about, well, you're at that age where you're going through changes and it can make
Uh,
your mind just
he,
do
he
crazy
pulled the
things. And
he
so
pulled the old hormone card out.
he absolutely pulled the hormone card. And I said, well, that's clearly not the case at this point in time. And then he would accuse me of having an affair with every man he could think of, whether it was our kids' teachers in the high school or neighbors or my counselor. There had to be something. And then he was telling people, like, what is it that you call it, that this, I can't even remember. It was a term that you used in your book, that they put out this message about whatever it is that they want people to know about you.
The smear campaign.
Smear, that's it. Thank you. The smear campaign started. So
Mm.
I actually got a call one time on my cell phone when I'm driving, and this woman who I don't even know, she's in our church, she called me and congratulated me on my upcoming marriage. And I said, what? And she goes, I heard that you're getting married and we're sad to see you leave the church, but we're really happy for you. And I said, well, I just have a question for you. And she goes, what? I said, who is it that I'm actually marrying?
Yes,
I
please
said that
enlighten me. I want to meet this person.
the last thing on my mind was ever doing that again. And then I had another one call and congratulate me on being pregnant, which was physically impossible at the moment, but at that time. And then at a big event where a bunch of people were, it was our son's wedding actually. He confided in my best friend and told her that he thought that I was a lesbian. So it got so grandiose. It's like you can't have all of those things floating out there at the same time because they kind of are mutually exclusive of each other. But it was
He's putting it out there that he's protecting his reputation, his image.
absolutely.
You left because you were cheating or you've now changed, you've changed your preference from men to women. It's because of you. It's not anything that he's done.
Absolutely. Absolutely. There had to be some reason why. And then I love your term with the flying monkeys. It's such a perfect name for his people. I had so many flying monkeys. I finally had to disconnect my home phone. That back when everybody had a home phone in those days, because the phone calls just kept coming. He would try to convince so many people to feel sorry for him and convince them to call me and try to talk me into taking him back, and calls about apologizing about how we're so sorry that the church has taken him away from you so much that it's caused your marriage to fall. And it was constant, absolute constant. I get books in the mail.
Damage control. He's in damage control. That's what this
That's a good way to put it.
is about. It's about a preemptive strike also, because he knows what you're going to tell people about him. So he's getting in early to destroy your credibility and of
Well,
course to isolate you.
Right, yes, very much so. And to get people to reject me and isolate me from the church community because there was something wrong with me. And it frustrated him because he couldn't convince me to take him back or to try it again. I was so done that there was no way I was going back to that again. And
Mm.
so when he got frustrated and I wouldn't listen to him, he started stalking me. And it got to be, it was it was terrifying. And when you try to explain the experience of stalking to someone who's never been stalked before, and
Mm.
they ask, well, how often did he do that? And you say, well, sometimes it was 2 times a week, and then they'd go 2 or 3 weeks where it didn't happen. They go, well, see, that was 2 or 3 weeks that you had a break on that. No,
Yeah.
that's not how stalking works, because you
Right.
never know. You're always on edge, waiting for the next time, whether it's
Exactly.
in a minute or whether it's the next day or the next week. You don't know.
Yeah.
So that in between time, it's very stressful, and you're
Yeah.
very anxious about it the whole time. So I
You're
would,
thinking that he might be around the corner. So, you self-isolate just in case. It's
well, yeah,
traumatizing being stalked. But nowadays, much stalking or the majority of stalkers use social media
right.
and
And
that
technology.
technology. Well,
Yeah.
it's an added kind of strategy they use to stalk. But back then, when we didn't have this social media and this global connection, it was about seeing them face to face, seeing them at the shop, seeing them on the train, and them predicting your routine. That's terrifying.
Right. Showing up where you were
Yeah, not
because they've
not
been
to min-
following you.
not to kind of minimize the terror that comes with being stalked via technology. That's just as traumatizing. But back then, they were right in your face. Yeah.
Yeah, so he would handwrite letters on computer paper that was lined with red roses,
Oh,
4 pages, and I would open the mailbox to get the mail out, and there was the handwritten letter, hand delivered, not through the mail. So I would get the message that he was there. He'd come by the house.
yeah.
So that was a very intentional message he was sending to me. I would come home sometimes and there would be a box on the front porch, a book he wanted me to read about the dangers of divorce to children and that sort of thing. And then one time there was a box inside the house full of gifts trying to entice me to take him back, just letting me know that he had access inside the home. And I
Oh,
wasn't willing to change the locks. I just felt like that seemed extreme. He's the father of my children. He's this prominent person in the community. I need to take this slowly and try to figure out a way to navigate it. And I really didn't think he would ever harm me in any way, because it was stalking and it was threatening, but it seemed like in a mild way. And
mhm.
then I remembered this today when I was listening to your book. There was a part about how they try to create danger for you and put you in harm's way so that they can swoop in and be the
The
hero and the rescuer.
hero.
So he actually did that. He was taking my girls with him to go to a town about an hour away to see his parents for Thanksgiving, and stopped at a mall and wanted to talk to them about our relationship. And the girls weren't having it. And so I had to go up there and rescue them from the mall because they'd run away from him, long story short. But anyway, so we're driving home with them, and we get home and the back door to our home is wide open.
Oh,
And he had brought their suitcases back because they were already up there. They were in his car. And so he had left the suitcases inside the house, but left the door wide open. And you have to understand that he had a nickname that we gave him. We called him Safety Sam. He was always locking doors. He would lock the car doors inside the locked garage. He was
hmm
that much of a safety person.
hmm
So the fact that he did that, and it was obvious that he had done it. I don't know why he wanted to make it quite so obvious, but the girls were terrified. We were scared, and we left and called the police, and they came and met us. And but that was his way of showing me that I was in danger and no longer having a man in the house to protect them. Look what I was doing for for our
So,
daughters.
so Tracy, are you saying that the door was left open and he implied that it was someone else that left it?
That's what his implication was, is
Oh,
that you're going to be in danger and no one's going to be there to protect you. But he wasn't very smart about it because there were the suitcases that he brought back, so it was obvious he had been there. But
yeah.
he just said, well, maybe the wind opened the door. And I was like, not to someone who locks every door that,
So
you intentionally
the
left them open.
just the trying to wrap your head around the fact that someone would make you intentionally make you feel that frightened,
And not
that
just me, but the
scared, like you've
girls.
had, such a violation of your, your soul, your whole existence. This person intentionally made you feel terrified, just
And
so they
his
could
daughters. Yes.
swoop in and be your hero.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Well, it didn't work. But the stalking continued. He had a manual transmission Mustang, and so it was really loud. And I could hear him driving up and down the street,
Yeah.
just let me know that he was watching me, watching what I was doing. But I really never thought he would harm me. One day I did come home and his car was on the street, parked on the street. And I was just like, oh my God, what am I going to do? I was so distraught. How do I handle this? So I walk through the garage and I can hear him. He's in the backyard talking to, I have a technician there we had a septic tank, and the septic tank guy was there to do his quarterly, whatever. And he's out there chatting away with him like he lives there, like that's his home still, right? He's never talked to this man ever in the 4 or 5 years that we were there. And so he's acting like they're all chummy buddies. And so I walked back there, I talked to the tech, and I turned to him, I said, you need to leave. You're not supposed to be here. And I turned and walked back to the house. And I'm walking in the home, and he's right behind me. And as I'm turning to close the door, his foot is in the doorway. And he pushes his way into the home. And I scream at him. I said, you have to leave. You cannot be here. And he screams back at me, this is still my house. I have every right to be here. You can't make me leave.
My goodness.
And I don't even, I mean, I'm in shock. I see a look in his eyes that I've never seen before.
Mm.
And then he comes up to me and he says, in the eyes of God, we are still married, and it would not be wrong for us to have sex. And I freeze. I've never felt that fight or flight sensation before, but that's absolutely what I was going through. And I just stood there for a minute, terrified, or like, what happens next? What does he mean by that? And I turn and walk away like I was walking to the bathroom. And I said, I'll be right back. Instead, I turn and I go back towards the garage. And I remember clearly saying to myself, walk calmly, just slowly walk, don't run, because I didn't want him chasing me. And I get out the door, and then I run to my car, and I jump in my car and I leave, and I immediately call the police. And then I call a locksmith to come change the locks on the doors. And then I called my lawyer and said, okay, that restraining order you've been trying to convince me to get, I think it's time.
I'm going to get it now.
And he left, and the police met me about 20 minutes later at the house and made sure he was gone. And we talked about it, and I kept apologizing to them because I said, well, he's gone now. So, maybe I just it wasn't as big a deal and I told him what he said. And they said, absolutely not. This is exactly what you need to do. Stalking is very, very serious. Mm-hmm. We need to know that this is going on. And they took notes about what kind of car he drove. And they said they will patrol the street when they're out on their beat. And if they see his car, they'll pull him over and tell him he needs to leave. And so that did make me feel a lot better. And having new locks on the doors helped with that too. And then he did, thank goodness, listen to the restraining order.
Yeah.
So
how did that impact the smear campaign? I imagine he would have had some really tall stories to tell everyone why he was unfairly victimized with this restraining order.
Well, as you know, what the flying monkeys do, part of what their role is to report back, to get information and report back, right? And so he wasn't getting any reports of anything that I was saying because I wasn't saying anything. I had one good friend I talked to a little bit, and my mother, and nobody else. There was no point. This is a parish of 10,000 people and a lot of people in a small community. And so there was no point in me saying anything because I wasn't going to be believed anyway. So I just laid low. And so I think he picked up on the fact that I wasn't saying anything. So he felt free range that he could do whatever he wanted, say whatever he wanted, and get away with it because I wasn't countering that.
Yeah. But you actually were doing what, I tell everyone to do, which is you weren't defending yourself to that smear campaign because that's exactly what he wanted. He wanted the engagement, and he would have just enjoyed that so much if you had have defended yourself. It's so hard not to, but it's what
It
they.
is. Yes. Well, and I think that part of my ability to do that sort of response came from my therapist, from having counseling to guide me through that process. That if you respond to it, you're feeding that narcissistic need that he has. The worst thing you can do for a narcissist is to completely leave them alone, to not talk
Yes.
to them, respond to them, react to them in any way, shape, or form. They don't know how to handle that. And hopefully that idea is to get them to go find someone else to get that supply from.
Yes, you want to be as boring as possible. So,
Yeah.
how long did that last for you? Are you in a good place today where you feel like he's left you alone?
So, I mean, this was years ago. So I've been happily married for 10 years to a wonderful man that I never thought I would even look for, much less find. So
Yeah.
it's way far in my past. But as you know, when you talk about it, it can certainly bring it
Mm,
to the present. But the separation period was much longer than necessary. It took us about 20 months for the divorce to be final because he made it as difficult as possible and threw
of
every wrench he
course.
could into the plans and
Yeah.
drew it out as long as he could possibly draw it out. But we finally were able to get divorced and he left me alone for the most part, but the collateral damage of it was my children. So he was able to take the golden child, my
Mhm.
son,
Yeah.
and wrangle him away from me. And so
Yeah.
he convinced my son. I think it was just too hard on my son to see his father in this vulnerable place that he put himself in because I left him, I divorced him. And
Yes.
so as a son, he couldn't handle that. And so he came to his father's side, and his father leaned on him way too much. He was still a kid. So it was about a year and a half that my son and I had a very estranged relationship because he would call me and he was the mouthpiece for my ex. He was the messenger. And I would, but without saying, this is what dad told me to tell you, he would say the things and I would say, I know that came straight from your dad. And if you want to have a conversation with me, we're not going to do this. And,
Yeah.
and
It's
so it was
that.
very difficult. That was really hard.
Yeah. It's
That was really hard.
the part of domestic violence that I think doesn't get spoken about often enough is the destruction or at least the damage to that bond between one or more, between you and one or more of the
Yeah.
children because they're being manipulated by the other parent and also because they're seeing you react to the abuser a lot of the time who is monitoring their own
Hmm.
behavior. So all of these things, and of course, children have a trauma bond to their narcissistic parent, just like an intimate partner, where they become, dependent on those highs and lows and the breadcrumbs of their
Right.
parents' love, in inverted commas.
They
Yeah.
do. And I think the girls tried to do that for a while. My son still has kind of at arm's length a relationship with his father. My
Yeah.
girls don't ever see him. About 2 years after the divorce, they both changed their last name to my maiden name. It was that severe because he was like a local celebrity. So many people knew him.
Yeah.
And you used your last name and it was an unusual last name. And so everybody go, "Oh, your father, your husband." And I tell this
Yeah.
funny story because when I got divorced, I told my lawyer the year I was getting divorced, my youngest daughter was a senior in high school. And I didn't want to change my last name until she had graduated. I just thought I'll just do it later. So we just kind of keep things as copacetic as I could. But he went ahead and did it anyway. He says, "Oh,
Mm.
you'll thank me later. Then you won't have to pay for have it done later." So, but I thought, okay, so my name's changed, but I don't have to make it official. I don't change every document until after that. So we had sold the big house and my daughter and I moved into another little house for her senior year. So she'd have a peaceful home away from all the memories that were in that other house. And
Yeah.
I was going to the city to turn on the water and I hand over my driver's license and the woman goes, "Oh my gosh, I just love your husband." And just on and on and on and on. And
Oh,
I don't
no.
say anything. I just go, I smile. And I immediately drove to the Department of Motor Vehicles and changed my name, my driver's license. I said,
Uh-huh.
forget about that. I
Yeah.
can't handle this. It was too much, you know. So
Yeah.
it was that sort of a situation that we lived in, that
Yeah,
glass house
it
below
is a
us.
lot of work to change your name and
It is.
get all those documents together and go to everyone and get all new, bank cards and driver's license, etc. But oh my goodness, sometimes it's really, or most of the time, it's really worth it. It's empowering. It's
It
it's
is. It's
it's
a freedom.
connection to your abuser. Yeah, you
Yeah, it
don't have.
really just cuts that tie pretty succinctly, I
Yes,
think. I think it's a
absolutely.
good way to do it.
So, Tracy, tell us about what you're doing now and tell us a little bit about the movie and what that was like for you being able to, I guess, draw from your experience as a victim and have it be such a success.
Well, I after the divorce, I took a few years to just kind of dive into myself a little bit.
Mhm.
I reached out to a friend of mine reached out to me, and she was the CEO of a domestic violence shelter agency, and asked me to serve on the board. And I said no, I wasn't ready for that. I just wasn't
Yeah.
ready for it to be that public. She asked me about 3 times, and I finally said, "Okay, I will do this if you will agree to do something to address spiritual abuse."
Mhm.
And she said, she's the one that said, "Tell me what you mean by that." And I was just blown away by that. So I describe it to her. So she does that. She holds a forum with faith leaders of all different faiths, and it's like an information thing for faith leaders to teach them about domestic violence and that their role in helping victims who come and talk to them about it. If they tell them to go back to the marriage no matter what, that they're putting them in grave danger.
Yes,
As we know, the
absolutely.
statistics about stalking, it's like if you're stalked in your relationship, the women that die, 76% of them have been stalked by their abuser before their
Yes.
death. And so she did that. So I had to follow up with my obligation. So I was on the board for the agency and served on there for several years and then became board chair. And when I was board chair, we had a new CEO at that time, and we did the coordinated community response, the fatality review, high risk team, and all that came out of Duluth, Minnesota. And as the board chair, I would be able to see all the information about the fatality review. And I would see that there was a whole group of community leaders that would come together and open the folder of all the women who died by what they thought was domestic violence throughout the quarter, assess it, determine if it really was domestic violence or just a random act of violence or something. Then everybody at the table would run that name through their system to see where she showed up. Did she show up in the emergency room? Was she in criminal justice system? Did she call the shelter? Have problems with the police and all that sort of thing? And almost every single time, the women that died had never even called the hotline. They never reached out they didn't go to the shelter, not for legal services, counseling, anything. And I was really struck by that. I thought, what are we doing if we're not helping the women that need it the most? And it
Yes.
really had to sit with it a while. And I realized that it was a lack of awareness. Either they were not aware of the services that are there for them for free for up to 2 years to help them get on their feet and not live with the abuser, or they were not aware that their relationship was that violent and that it could
Yeah.
be that dangerous.
Yeah. Or
Both
they
of
were
those
so
things,
scared, just scared to leave it. It's that the fear of what will happen to them if they leave is
right, didn't know
less,
how. Right.
greater than the fear of staying. It's
Yeah.
yeah, and as you said, Tracy, women lose their lives in domestic violence relationships when there's been no contact with the police. And a lot of the time, we discover later on that there's been ongoing coercive control. And it happens so many times at the most dangerous period when they've left or they're about to leave. That's when
Right.
the
Yeah.
abuser
Yes.
has lost their control.
Complete control. Yeah, it is the most dangerous time. The first 90 days after they leave their
Yes.
abuser is the most dangerous time for fatalities. So with that information, I had to think, okay, so what can I do? I'm just one woman living in Texas. How can I make a difference to raise awareness on a level that would really make a difference? And I thought of all kinds of different things. And the thing that I landed on was making a film. because this is a global issue. It's in every community, in every part of this world. And a film is a way to get that message out on a grand scale like that. And I happen to know a young woman who was a writer and director. And I reached out to her. I'd worked with her on a smaller project before and just proposed the idea to her. What would you think about doing a film like this on domestic violence? And she thought I meant a documentary. And I said, oh, no, no, no. I don't want to, I mean, not many people, lay people, want to watch a film on domestic violence, a documentary about that, telling the details about it and all that. But I wanted it to be a narrative. I wanted it to be a film that people would look at and go, oh, that looks like a romantic thriller. Let's go watch that. Looks like a good trailer. Looks good. Let's go watch it. So it would have a wider appeal and maybe a greater audience.
Yeah.
So she didn't know that much about domestic violence. So I introduced her to the CEO of the agency, and she kind of gave her a quick DV 101 course. And she allowed her to come to the shelter and interview some of the women that were living in the shelter. Some of them had just arrived hours before she got there to interview them. So she could get a sense of the fear and the trauma that they were experiencing in their relationships and the need to escape. She also attended offender classes. She went and listened to get the persona of the offender, the mindset of the defender, the entitlement that they and that power and control they think that they have a right to have. So she did that as well. And then she read my personal journals that I wasn't a big journaler until things got really bad. And then I started just to keep, because he would say, I said this, and I would go, I knew that I hadn't. So I started keeping track of everything. So she read my personal journals, and I asked her two things. I said, I want it to be authentic. I don't want it to be some flamboyant Hollywood version of domestic violence. I want it to be what it really looks like, sounds like, feels like. And I want you to address spiritual abuse. I wanted faith abuse to be in there because it's so not known. In being in the South part of the United States, there's a lot of it here in certain pockets more than others. And people don't see it as abuse because they just think that that's part of the makeup of that faith community. Yeah. She did that. And so she created the film, wrote the script, and the two of us produced this film together. So I've never done anything like this. And honestly, I had no idea what I was doing to begin with. But I'm a take charge, kind of problem solving, we can get it done person. And so we just tackled one thing at a time, but it was quite an undertaking. There's so many working parts of doing a film. From this, once the script is written, you think, okay, now we're ready to make a film. No, there's so many things. You have to have all these sites for filming on each of the different scenes, and all the cast has to be done, and the costumes and the sound person and all the cast, the crew has to be hired, and all those things, everything has to be lined up. So there were so many working parts to it, but we were able to get it done in a short time and on a relatively low budget. And then right after we made the film, we started applying to film festivals, and we got into 2 film festivals at the end of 2019. And then you can imagine what happened after that. So we were in one film festival early part of January of 2020. And then the entire film world just was turned upside down from COVID. Everything shut down. All the film festivals shut down. They tried to pivot and regroup and make the festivals virtual, which was really difficult to do because they had to protect the films, because if someone could download the film, then they pirated it. So it's very tricky. So we managed to get through we went to several film festivals, and we won awards in all of them. Won lots of best film awards, best director, People's Choice Awards. So we got a lot of the accolades about it. And we also, every time we did a film screening at a film festival, we did a Q&A afterwards. Yeah. To unpack it with the audience, because it's a pretty heavy film. Well, I'll say before we show it, if you've had this in your past or you know someone who's had it, this can be triggering, because we really tried to make it authentic, and we would have survivors give us feedback that they felt very seen and heard and validated by watching the film. And to me, that was better than any award that we received. Oh
gosh,
that was
and you know what? Your success proved your abuser wrong, and like, how inspirational are you using your trauma to make something like that happen, to help other victims and survivors? So Tracy, look, I just want to thank you so much for your time today. It's been just, I hate using the word interesting, but or fascinating because it's so textbook, but everyone there's always these different nuances that and slightly different dynamic for each person. And we don't often hear about spiritual abuse. I just want to thank you so much for your time today. But please tell our listeners the name of your movie and where they can watch it.
Well, the name of the movie is No Ordinary Love. And currently, it's a little complicated at the moment, but currently should be still showing on Amazon Prime, Google Play, iTunes, Crackle, Tubi, places like that. So they just need to search the name No Ordinary Love. And the director is China Robinson, Chyna. So
Okay.
they'll know it's the right one. We've had a little complication with our distributor. We signed with a distributor, and about 2 years into the contract, they got bought out by Chicken Soup for the Soul Entertainment. It hasn't gone very well because then that company ended up filing bankruptcy. So it's very complicated, but we're still trying to keep the movie out there because we're getting lots of good feedback. The movie is showing in 30 different countries around the world,
Oh
which
my
a lot in
goodness.
Australia and United Kingdom. In
Yes.
Canada, where this is a huge issue that a
Hmm.
lot of people are working on. So we feel good about having it done and having it shown in different countries because you're able to spread that message.
Yeah, you
So
should
we hope
feel
it will
what an
be.
achievement. That's just absolutely amazing. And you should just feel so proud of yourself. And there are so many people that will benefit, that will have your movie as, I guess, just something to let them know that number one, there is light at the end of the tunnel. And number two, you're not alone. This is happening to many other people. So I know it will just inspire and help so many victims of domestic violence. So thank you for that, Tracy. Is there
Thank
any
you.
last thoughts that you wanted to put out there to tell people who might be listening?
Well, I think if someone is listening and they are currently in an abusive relationship or think that they are, I really encourage them to reach out. There are so many services available. And the best thing to do, instead of talking to your best friend and having that be your counsel, find someone who specializes in this. Call a
Yeah.
hotline number, find a shelter or agency that you can speak to someone who knows about domestic violence. Because if you go to a counselor together, like a marriage counselor with a narcissist as your partner, especially an abusive one, it will not go well. It's not advised at all. So I
Yeah.
would not recommend that. But do reach out for help. There is help out there. And once you are free of that and you are ready, if you're able to use your voice, you don't have to make a movie. You don't have to write a book. You don't even have to have a podcast. You just use your voice to talk about what happened to you. So other people will resonate with that. And I think that's one of the reasons why I made this film. If I
Hmm.
was a young woman, mother, and I watched this movie, how would that have changed my life? It would have
Yes.
opened my eyes to a new possibility for myself. So that's really one of the things I wanted to do with the film. But I do hope anyone who listens to this podcast is encouraged to go and seek some help and find yourself again. You're still there. You're still
Yes.
there.
Yeah. Find that person that you were meant to be before you were abused. And that brings us to the end of another Fake Love and Flying Monkeys episode. I hope you found Tracy's story as inspirational as I did, guys. I truly love being able to speak to victims and survivors because no one else knows what you're going through or just what this type of abuse is like other than a fellow survivor. There's no two words, I think, that make you feel more heard than me too. So don't forget, guys, if you'd like to have a one-on-one counseling session with me, please just see the website link in the description. And of course, don't forget to get your copy of my best-selling book, Fake Love. Now, for those of you who are wondering what you can do to support the channel, every little bit helps. But the best thing you can do to keep this channel going is to leave a rating and a review. And of course, share it. And of course, if you want to do something else, you can always buy me a cup of coffee. There's a link to do that too. So on that note, it's bye from me for now. Until tomorrow's episode, remember, you are worthy of love, and you are worthy of so much more than a lifetime of fake love and flying monkeys.